The words still echo in my mind like a death sentence. She won't survive the night. My daughter-in-law Thea whispered those chilling words to someone on the phone while I lay in what she thought was a morphine-induced coma in that sterile hospital room. But what she didn't know was that my phone was hidden under my blanket, recording every single word of her cold-blooded conversation. What I captured that night would expose a conspiracy so twisted and calculated that it would destroy her life and save mine. I'm Winifred Chen, and this is the story of how a retired NASA engineer outsmarted someone who was literally trying to murder me for my money. Standing at death's door while listening to someone plan, your murder changes you in ways I never could have imagined. But before I tell you about that horrifying night in Phoenix General Hospital, you need to understand the intricate web of deception that led to that moment. Because what happened to me wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden decision. It was a meticulously planned execution that had been months in the making. Let me start from the beginning, because understanding how I ended up fighting for my life while my own daughter-in-law plotted my death requires knowing the complicated history between us. I'm 67 years old, a retired aerospace engineer who spent 40 years of my life designing critical components for NASA's most ambitious missions. I worked on everything from shuttle heat shields to Mars rover navigation systems, and I was damn good at my job. My colleagues called me the detail detective because I could spot problems in complex systems that others missed entirely. That skill, as it turned out, would literally save my life. After 4 decades of government service, I retired to a comfortable life in Paradise Valley, Arizona, one of Phoenix's most affluent neighborhoods. My husband Bernard and I had built a beautiful life together in our sprawling ranch-style home with its infinity pool, overlooking the desert mountains. We traveled extensively, hosted dinner parties for our scientist friends, and planned to spend our golden years exploring the world together. But life had different plans. Bernard passed away suddenly 3 years ago from a massive heart attack while we were hiking in Sedona. One moment he was pointing out a red-tailed hawk soaring above the canyon, and the next moment he was gone. The grief nearly destroyed me. After 42 years of marriage, I didn't know how to exist without him. Our house, which had always felt warm and alive with his laughter and terrible dad jokes, became a mausoleum of memories. Bernard's death left me not just emotionally devastated, but also significantly wealthy. Between his NASA pension, our investments, the fully paid Paradise Valley home worth $1.2 million, 2 rental properties in Tempe, and a substantial life insurance policy, I was suddenly worth close to $4 million. At 64, I was a grieving widow, with more money than I knew what to do with, and no real family except for my son Fletcher and my sister Delilah, who lived in Portland. Fletcher is 34, and I love him with every fiber of my being, but he's always been what Bernard diplomatically called a free spirit. As a child, Fletcher showed incredible artistic talent, spending hours drawing elaborate fantasy worlds and photographing everything from insects to storm clouds. I encouraged his creativity while Bernard worried constantly about his lack of practical ambition. "Art is beautiful, Win," Bernard would say, "but it doesn't pay the bills. The boy needs a backup plan." But Fletcher never developed that backup plan. After college, he bounced between jobs as a wedding photographer, freelance journalist, and portrait artist. His work was genuinely talented, but he lacked the business acumen to build a sustainable career. At 34, he was still living paycheck to paycheck, often calling me for help with rent or car repairs. I never minded helping him. That's what mothers do, but I worried about his future. After Bernard's funeral, Fletcher moved back into our family home temporarily to help me adjust to living alone. I welcomed him with open arms, grateful for the company and the sense of purpose that caring for someone gave me. The house felt less empty with Fletcher's camera equipment scattered around the dining room and his terrible indie music playing in the kitchen while he made his elaborate breakfast smoothies. That's when he met Thea, and everything in our peaceful life began to unravel. Fletcher discovered Thea working as a barista at a trendy coffee shop in Old Town Scottsdale called Copper Moon Cafe. He'd gone there to photograph their outdoor art installation for a local magazine, and according to him, he took one look at Thea's steaming milk behind the espresso machine and fell instantly in love. "Mom, you have to meet her," he told me after their first date, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "She's incredible. Beautiful, smart, funny, and she actually gets my work." She looked at my portfolio and understood what I was trying to express in ways that other people never have. Thea Kovacs was indeed breathtakingly beautiful. At 29, she had that striking Eastern European bone structure, sharp cheekbones, pale blue eyes that seemed to see right through you, and platinum blonde hair that she wore in a sleek bob. When Fletcher first brought her home for dinner, she charmed me completely. She admired my garden, asked thoughtful questions about my NASA career, and insisted on helping me clean up afterward. "Please, Mama Win," she said in her slight accent that I could never quite place, "let me help you with these dishes. You cooked this beautiful meal, and it's the least I can do." She called me Mama Win from that very first evening, and something about the way she said it made my heart melt. I thought I was gaining a daughter. Thea claimed to be from somewhere near Prague, but she was always vague about her exact background. She said her family had immigrated to the United States when she was a teenager, and that she'd been working her way through community college while supporting herself at various service jobs. Her story was compelling, the hard-working immigrant girl pursuing the American dream, and it explained why she seemed so grateful for everything, including Fletcher's modest freelance income and our comfortable lifestyle. Within 3 months of meeting, Fletcher was completely smitten. "I want to marry her, Mom," he announced one morning over breakfast. "I know it seems fast, but when you know, you know. Dad always said he knew you were the one after just 2 weeks." I had reservations about the speed of their relationship, but Fletcher was a grown man, and I could see how happy Thea made him. She encouraged his photography, helped him organize his chaotic business records, seemed to bring out a confidence in him that I'd never seen before. When they got engaged after 6 months of dating, I was genuinely thrilled for them. The wedding was a small, intimate ceremony at a boutique resort in Sedona that I paid for as my gift to them. Thea looked radiant in a simple but elegant dress, and Fletcher couldn't stop smiling. During the ceremony, when they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, Thea promised to love, protect, and support Fletcher through all of life's adventures. I cried happy tears, thinking about how proud Bernard would have been to see our son so genuinely happy. After the wedding, it made financial sense for Fletcher and Thea to continue living with me. The Paradise Valley house was enormous. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a guest wing with its own entrance, and I enjoyed having them around. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a dark room for Fletcher's photography, and Thea took over the sunroom as her workspace for the online jewelry business she was starting. At first, everything seemed perfect. Thea was attentive and helpful, often bringing me cups of the special herbal tea she'd learned to make from her grandmother. She would sit with me in the evenings, asking about my work at NASA, my travels with Bernard, and my thoughts on everything from politics to gardening. She seemed genuinely interested in my life and experiences. But gradually, subtle changes began creeping into our household dynamic. Thea started making small comments about the inefficiency of such a large house for just 3 people. She would mention articles she'd read about elderly people living alone and the dangers of maintaining such a large property. When I received mail from my financial advisor or insurance company, I'd often find her looking through it with great interest. "I hope you don't mind, Mama Win," she'd say when I caught her going through my correspondence. "Fletcher asked me to help organize your important papers. He worries about you managing everything alone." But Fletcher had never asked her to do any such thing, and when I mentioned it to him, he seemed genuinely confused. "I never asked Thea to go through your mail, Mom," he said. "Maybe she's just trying to be helpful." She comes from a culture where daughters-in-law traditionally help manage household affairs. The red flags started appearing more frequently about 6 months after their marriage. Thea began suggesting, gently at first, that I should consider downsizing to a retirement community. She would leave brochures for upscale senior living facilities on my kitchen counter, always with a note like, "Just thought you might find this interesting." Or, "Fletcher and I saw this and thought the activities looked fun." When I showed no interest in moving, her suggestions became more persistent. "Mama Wynne, don't you get lonely in this big house? These retirement communities have so many social activities. You could make new friends, have people to talk to every day. And think about how much easier your life would be without all the maintenance and upkeep of this place." But I loved my home. Bernard and I had designed it together, chosen every tile and light fixture. The garden was my sanctuary, filled with desert plants that I'd carefully selected and nurtured over the years. The idea of leaving felt like abandoning the last tangible connection I had to my life with Bernard. When gentle persuasion didn't work, Thea's approach became more calculated. She started befriending my neighbors, introducing herself as my concerned daughter-in-law who was worried about Mama Wynne living alone. She told them that I'd been having memory issues and asked them to call her if they noticed anything concerning about my behavior. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 15 years, mentioned this to me during one of our weekly walks. "Wynne, your daughter-in-law seems very devoted," she said carefully. She stopped by last week to introduce herself and asked me to keep an eye on you. She said, "You've been having some confusion lately?" I told her I hadn't noticed anything, but she seemed very concerned. I was mortified and confused. I wasn't having any memory issues or confusion. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. I was still reading scientific journals, managing my own finances, and maintaining correspondence with former NASA colleagues around the world. Why would Thea tell my neighbors that I was having cognitive problems? When I confronted her about it, Thea was all innocent concern. "Oh, Mama Wynne, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just telling the neighbors that I worry about you living alone, especially with your heart condition. I didn't mean to suggest you were having memory problems. Maybe I didn't express myself clearly. You know how my English sometimes isn't perfect." But her English was perfect. Thea spoke better English than most native speakers, with only the faintest trace of an accent that seemed to come and go depending on her mood. I was beginning to suspect that many things about Thea weren't quite what they seemed. 3 weeks ago, I started feeling unusually tired and nauseous. At first, I attributed it to stress and age, but the symptoms got progressively worse. My heart would race at random times, I'd experience dizzy spells, and I began having trouble sleeping. Thea was extremely attentive during this period, constantly bringing me food and insisting I take my medications with the special herbal tea she'd started making for me. "You need to keep your strength up, Mama Wynne," she'd say, standing over me while I drank the bitter-tasting tea. "This will help you feel better." But I wasn't feeling better. If anything, I was getting worse. My hands would shake, I'd break out in cold sweats, and my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. When I mentioned to Fletcher that I thought I should see a doctor, Thea immediately volunteered to drive me, insisting that I was too weak to go alone. That should have been my first clue that something was seriously wrong. Thea had never shown any interest in my medical care before, but suddenly she was eager to be involved in every doctor's appointment. She would sit in the examination room, answering questions for me and describing my symptoms in ways that made me sound more confused and frail than I actually felt. Dr. Martinez, my longtime physician, seemed puzzled by my declining condition. My blood work showed some irregularities, but nothing that clearly explained my symptoms. He recommended that I stay hydrated, rest, and come back if things got worse. Thea nodded sympathetically and promised to take good care of me. Over the next week, my condition deteriorated rapidly. I was barely able to get out of bed, my speech became slurred, and I started having episodes where my heart would race so fast I thought I might die. Fletcher was traveling for a photography assignment in Flagstaff, so it was just Thea and me in the house when everything came to a head. On a Tuesday night in October, I woke up around 2 a.m. feeling like I was dying. My heart was pounding, I couldn't catch my breath, and the room was spinning violently. I tried to call out for help, but my voice was barely a whisper. Thea appeared in my doorway within minutes, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Oh no, Mama Win," she said, but there was something in her voice that didn't sound surprised or concerned. It sounded satisfied. "You're having another episode. I think we need to get you to the hospital." The next few hours are somewhat blurry, but I remember being in the emergency room at Phoenix General, with Thea speaking to doctors in hushed tones about my declining mental state and increasing confusion. I kept trying to tell them that something was wrong, that I didn't feel like myself, but the words wouldn't come out clearly. The medical staff seemed to accept Thea's version of events, treating me like a confused elderly woman, rather than someone who might be in genuine danger. They admitted me for observation and started me on IV fluids and heart monitoring. Thea never left my side, playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law perfectly. She brought me blankets, adjusted my pillows, and spoke to nurses about my condition with just the right mixture of concern and resignation. But here's where my engineering background saved my life. Throughout my career, I'd learned to document everything, to gather evidence before drawing conclusions. Some instinct told me that I needed to start paying closer attention to what was happening around me, even though I felt terrible. So I did something that would prove to be crucial. I started recording everything on my phone. I kept my phone hidden under my blanket, using the voice memo app to capture conversations when Thea thought I was sleeping. The first few recordings were just routine interactions with the nurses and doctors, but on my second night in the hospital, I captured something that confirmed my worst fears. It was around 11 p.m. when Thea's phone rang. She stepped out into the hallway to take the call, but she didn't go far enough away, and my phone picked up every word of what would turn out to be the most damning conversation of her life. "Yes, it's working perfectly," she said in a voice I'd never heard before. Cold, calculating, completely different from the sweet tone she used around Fletcher and me. "The doctors think it's just her heart condition getting worse. They have no idea about the digitalis." My blood ran cold. Digitalis is a heart medication that can be deadly in large doses, especially for someone with my existing heart condition. I'd read about it in my research after Bernard's death, when I was trying to understand his heart medication better. "She won't survive the night," Thea continued, and those words hit me like a physical blow. "The life insurance policy will pay out within 30 days, and Fletcher is the sole beneficiary. He has no idea what I've been doing. He thinks his mother is just getting old and sick." There was a pause as the person on the other end of the line said something I couldn't hear. Then Thea laughed, a sound so chilling that it gave me goosebumps. "Of course I've been careful. I've been adding it to her tea for weeks, just small amounts to make her sick enough to need hospitalization. Tonight I gave her enough to finish the job." The beauty of digitalis is that it mimics natural heart failure in elderly patients. No one will think to test for it. I lay there in that hospital bed, my heart racing not from poisoning but from pure terror, as my daughter-in-law casually discussed murdering me for insurance money. But she wasn't finished. "Fletcher will be devastated, of course, but he'll get over it, and with $2 million, we can finally start our real life together. Maybe move to Europe where no one knows us." The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Thea discussing how she'd been researching my finances, forging documents to make herself Fletcher's financial advisor, and planning to convince him to liquidate my assets quickly after my death. She'd even prepared a story about how I'd been secretly struggling with dementia and had asked her to handle my affairs. When she finally hung up and came back into my room, I pretended to be unconscious. She stood over my bed for several minutes, and I could feel her watching me, probably waiting for signs that her poison was taking effect. Then she did something that made my skin crawl. She leaned down and whispered, "Goodbye, Mama Win. Thank you for everything." But Thea had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated both my intelligence and my survival instincts. While she was on that phone call, I'd managed to send the voice recording to my sister Delilah in Portland, along with a text message that said, "If something happens to me, listen to this recording and call the police immediately." I also used my phone to research digitalis poisoning and discovered that if caught early enough, it could be treated with specific medications and procedures. The key was getting medical help before the poison did permanent damage to my heart. When Thea left my room around midnight, supposedly to get coffee from the vending machine, I used my call button to summon a nurse. When she arrived, I forced myself to speak as clearly as possible despite feeling terrible. "I need to speak to Dr. Martinez immediately," I whispered. "I think someone is trying to poison me with digitalis." The nurse looked skeptical at first, probably thinking I was confused or paranoid, but something in my voice must have convinced her to take me seriously. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Martinez was at my bedside, and I played him the recording I'd captured on my phone. His reaction was immediate and decisive. He ordered emergency blood tests for digitalis toxicity, called hospital security to detain Thea when she returned, and contacted the Phoenix Police Department. The blood tests came back positive for dangerous levels of digitalis, levels that would have killed me within hours if left untreated. Thea returned from her supposed coffee run to find 2 police officers waiting in my room. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, fear, and then cold anger when she realized what had happened. "You recorded me?" she hissed, dropping all pretense of being the caring daughter-in-law. "You sneaky old witch." "That's right," I said, my voice getting stronger as the doctors administered the antidote for digitalis poisoning. "And you're going to prison for attempted murder." The police arrested Thea on the spot, and a search of my house revealed her cache of digitalis tablets, which she'd been grinding up and adding to my tea. They also found forged documents, research about my financial assets, and a detailed plan for convincing Fletcher to move abroad after my death. Fletcher returned from his photography trip to find his wife in jail and his mother recovering from a murder attempt. The betrayal devastated him, but he stood by me completely once he understood what had happened. The recording I'd made was so clear and damning that Thea's lawyer advised her to plea bargain rather than go to trial. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and fraud. During the sentencing hearing, the judge said he'd rarely seen such calculated, cold-blooded planning in a domestic case. Thea showed no remorse, even claiming during her statement that I'd driven her to it by being suspicious of her motives. The investigation also revealed that Thea's real name was Katerina Novak, and she had a history of targeting elderly people in other states. I wasn't her first victim, just her most prepared one. Fletcher and I have spent the last few months rebuilding our relationship and dealing with the trauma of realizing how close I came to being murdered by someone we'd welcomed into our family. He's moved out of my house but visits regularly, and he's started seeing a therapist to process the guilt he feels about bringing Thea into our lives. As for me, I've made a full recovery from the digitalis poisoning, but the experience changed me profoundly. I've become much more security conscious, installing cameras around my house and being more careful about who I trust. I've also started volunteering with elder abuse prevention organizations, sharing my story to help other seniors recognize the warning signs of financial and physical abuse. The most important lesson I learned is that your instincts are usually right, even when everyone around you is telling you that you're being paranoid or unreasonable. If something feels wrong, investigate it. Document everything, and never underestimate the power of technology to protect yourself. That tiny voice recorder on my phone didn't just capture evidence of a crime, it saved my life. And while I never want to go through something like that again, I'm proud that I was smart enough and strong enough to outmaneuver someone who thought I was just a helpless old woman. Thea was wrong about many things, but mostly she was wrong about this. I didn't just survive that night. I triumphed. And now she's the one whose life is over, spending 15 years behind bars while I'm still here, still sharp, and still fighting for justice for elderly people who might not be as fortunate as I was. I'm Winifred Chen, and I refuse to be anyone's victim.